Hello, everybody. Hey, everyone. Still waiting for Adam to join. Be a few minutes here. Hey, Adam.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you again. So we still have a few people joining. Not sure how many will actually make it. It's always tough trying to coordinate across multiple sides of the Atlantic. But I'll just give you a little bit of a quick kickoff, and then we can get started at 05, whatever local time you are. So welcome everyone to our next version of the External Speaker Series. Today's guest is Adam Safron. Adam is with Johns Hopkins Institute of Altered States Medicine. Did I say that correctly?
Psychedelic and consciousness research.
So, this is actually a very, very fun guest for me. Adam's paper on rhythmic entrainment called "What is Orgasm" was the paper that kicked off my change in career path from virtual reality into sex tech. It's a super inspiring work, and has been something that I've continued to come back in reference to. So I'm very glad he's had some time and is able to join us today. So I'll turn it over to you, Adam, to do a quick introduction to yourself.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm a neuroscientist and psychologist currently working at Johns Hopkins. And that paper was a real game changer for me, actually. It came at the tail end of a career in sex research. And just considering it started getting me thinking more deeply about the nature of consciousness and actually the rhythmic nature of the brain, which was something before then which I was avoiding. And that was kind of I don't know if I call it like a Rosetta Stone or like a golden thread, like that just unlocked a lot of things, realizing the importance of timing and rhythms. So let's, I guess, hop into it, and I'll go through some slides and save some time for discussion. So let's share screen. How do I do this?
Should be on the top right, or you Control-Shift-E.
Okay. I have to grant it permissions. 1 second. There we go. And you said Control-Shift-E?
Usually there's a little button next to the leave that share content. It's a white box with an upward arrow on it. You can click on that.
Open share tray. Aha, there it is. Thanks.
There we go.
Um,
Sorry, Mac, Command Shift E. That's my problem.
okay. And can you see everything?
We can indeed.
Excellent. In a way, this was a model of orgasm, but what it really ended up becoming was like a model of trance states, flow states, and really pleasures more generally, with the idea being that pretty much all of our most profound experiences and are seemingly of a rhythmic nature, which surprised me at the time and still surprises me. The natural ones, that is. With drugs, you can do other things. Although, still, if you look deep enough under the hood, it's rhythmic all the way through. So, following up on this paper and giving some of its origins, so some of it comes from a family history, in that my father was a temporal lobe epileptic who would have seizures with ecstatic auras. And sometimes these would be triggered when he was playing the piano. He was an improvisational jazz pianist. And I didn't make much of that at the time. The only thing I was interested was epilepsy and like what's the nature of it, what's going on. And in researching it, I found a couple interesting case studies that kind of got me thinking. So one was a case of someone using a toothbrush and this being capable of triggering orgasms. And so this started me thinking of a connection between reflex seizures, or seizures with a particular trigger, and oftentimes reflex seizures, like if you flash a strobe light at someone, like you'll give them a warning if they're have photosensitive epilepsy, saying you may not want to watch this. And so this high bandwidth rhythmic stimulus is capable of triggering seizures in some people. And so then the idea is, well, maybe something about these rhythmic stimulation being capable of triggering orgasms in general, could there be some kind of parallel there between these phenomena? So, and that's St. Teresa, who also would have potentially was temporal lobe epileptic. We don't know for sure, but she would have ecstatic auras. Dostoevsky also was one of those. So this account of rhythmic stimulation leading to orgasm, well, if you look at mating and the sex act and even before it, it's rhythmic the whole way through. It's there's a progression in many animal species going from, depending on the species, from song to dance to coupling or sex, where it's so like a bird, the nature of the song is rhythmic. And then if they get up close, you know, if you see like a maybe a bowerbird, I forget which kind, but like different birds will do like different, you know, bobbing, and this is across a lot of species, a kind of bobbing enticement. And then eventually the sex act itself tends to be rhythmic. And so what's going on here? So the idea is that the ability to create a precise, stable, and flexible rhythm, those seem like they're contradictory, like stability and flexibility, but not quite. The idea is like you might want to adjust the nature of the rhythm, especially if you're interacting with someone else. And so that's why you'd want it to be flexible. But stable in that, like if you're going all over the place, no one's going to be able to track it. And so a lot of things have to be going right with you as an organism in order to pull this off. Things have to be coordinated to get this coherence with respect to your motion or with respect to your song, and potentially with respect to having sex with someone else. And so the idea is that this might be in what you would call in evolutionary psychology an honest indicator of evolutionary fitness. You're just a generally good organism. And so you're displaying your fitness using rhythms at different stages to proceed to ultimately the bottom line of evolution is, will your genes make it into the next generation? And in terms of sexual selection, the person selecting would say, will your genes make it into the next generation with mine? Will I be willing to invest this in you and commingle with you in this way? So this story, though, I would say is probably at least 500 million years old, maybe even a billion. It goes at least back to the origins of the vertebrate body plan, I would guess. So, song and dance and sex. Yeah, insect song, and you see when they get up close, they'll start moving and then dance. It's a little bit strange with crickets. They actually do this thing where, like, because it's external fertilization, if they dance well enough, when the male drops his sperm packet, the female will be enticed to pick it up and insert it inside herself. At least that's how it works in crickets. But still, it's this idea of rhythmic gating. So, yeah, some of these ideas with respect to at least song, that Darwin speculated some similar things. I don't know if this will come through, but there's a video that I'd like to show real quickly that might. One, there we go. Click. I might need to paste it in the chat, but we'll see. We won't get the music, but actually that's fine. Can you hear the music?
Yes.
Okay, so this one I'm going to turn it down a bit.
In the shells are evenly matched. They bite and body slam each other until one gives way to the other.
So there's a male and a female.
Accepted him, he defends the red from other males and brown trout, which will eat the eggs. He courts her by raising his dorsal fin, pulsating next to her, which encourages her to breed and then dig into the gravel to lay and fertilize the eggs.
As many times as I watch this, it never gets
The
old.
eggs are carried downstream and start the next generation.
I watch it basically every day. I'm kidding.
For another year.
But okay. You all still with me? Hello?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Did you see those stable and flexible rhythms? I was just as impressed as she was, and I would have dropped my eggs if I had some. But what rhythms? It's not. So I've described an evolutionary significance, but the mind itself seems to be rhythmic in its syntax the whole way through. And you would ask, well, why is this? By mind, actually, in this case, I mean, well, I'd say the mind and the brain. If you think of like the mind as the functioning of the brain-body system. But why would rhythms be so important for the brain? Well, you have these neurons that will send. They call them spiking, or they'll send these signals or action potentials to each other at a certain frequency. And then when you receive stimulation from another neuron, there's a temporary, you're electrically depolarized, or your inner charge changes. But then there's mechanisms that reset you. And so there's this like window of opportunity for the signals to come in, and if they come in within the same spatial and temporal window, the signals can sum rather than decay. And so Pascal Fries says that rhythms are important for bringing order to the brain for signaling. He calls it communication through coherence. In order to get signals to propagate any distance through the brain in this this chaos of in the human brain, tens of billions of neurons, you have to coordinate them in time. And so rhythms would be this means of coordinating, both in a kind of self-organized fashion of only those patterns which are capable of rhythmically coordinating are the ones you see, but also we'll have certain like centralized processes, like the thalamus will be very important for establishing rhythms, the hippocampus, the claustrum, these centrally localized structures, many of them associated very strongly with as being necessary for consciousness. And if you alter them, creating profoundly altered states of consciousness, including anesthesia. In many ways, they are rhythmic coordination structures for other neural rhythms. And so I propose mechanistically in this trance and orgasm model that the mechanical, or including sound waves like hearing a song, but the rhythms, the rhythmic stimuli have the capacity to entrain the nervous system to be in sync with those rhythms. That so this idea of entrainment, the first incidents I know of it being referred to is by Christian Huygens, who is describing how he was working on this problem of getting calibrated clocks. And because that's going to be important for things like sea navigation. But one of the things that was serendipitously or discovered, surprisingly, was that if you put two clocks on the wall and you're letting the pendulums go, if you come back the next day, the clocks will be perfectly in sync. So if you're at a clock shop, you'll see on the wall all these clocks going, and it looks like someone had to adjust them, but no one did. It's just the clocks, all through exchanging vibrations through the wall, were capable of entraining each other. Through these micro pushes and pulls, they were able to bring each other into resonance, into this common rhythmic regime. And so the idea would be that this happens within the brain too, but at a much faster time scale. And that one thing that a rhythmic stimulus can do is it can entrain your inner rhythms to be in the same rhythmic regime as that thing which you're engaging with. So it could be a sound, it could be a pattern of touch, and pattern of touch with relation to sex, and as I might suggest, almost all pleasures, maybe all, except for pharmacological ones. Although even those, I'd suggest, if you look under the hood, rhythmic through and through. And so I can show you this example of entrainment in action. Speed it up a little bit. So first you see the metronomes, they're all out of sync. They have no connection to each other. Enter the Coke can. And now they're exchanging vibrations through this board. And they're able to push and pull on each other a little bit. And now they've negotiated a shared rhythm and they have become mutually entrained to each other. And that is entrainment. And if you take them, do they take it off? Yeah. And if you take it off, the Coke cans, eventually they'll fall out of sync with each other. So there's this coupling that you can get if you can establish this energetic connection. It can be a direct physical between two systems, or it can be informational, such as someone producing, singing and then you hearing. But this entrainment being a fundamental part of perception and consciousness. Another way of thinking about this would be pushing on a swing. So you get the timing right, and there's this ongoing push of the swing. And if you push on the swing, you can influence the way the person is swinging. But with respect to sex, I think, and dance and song, or I'd say dancing with someone and singing and having sex with someone, this is particularly a good one because that person is moving rhythmically and you are adjusting your rhythm to move rhythmically with them. And so this is another sense in which the rhythm has to be both stable and flexible. Otherwise, you can't dance with someone and you can't have sex with someone. You need to be able to predict it somewhat. And ideally, there's a little bit of both a novelty for interest and a moving around of the rhythm so that you can tune it in, so you can find the right resonance, which might change from moment to moment. So, and sexual entrainment might be maybe the most powerful one of all. It's bringing together all of your senses, your sight, your taste, your smell, the motion, the action of your body, and it's both external and internal, all going in the same frequency. And so all the parts of the brain that are tethered to these different senses, they're all receiving this same rhythmic input and this potential for entrainment. Another thing about this is there's also an ongoing feedback, both on the part of the person trying to live into this pleasure and the person trying to help them realize this, and that each person is adjusting their ongoing rhythms to tune in to get this optimal engagement, hopefully, if it's working well. And so the essence of the model is that you might have just, here's a boring, gray, non-rhythmic workaday interaction, all the stuff we do all the time, thinking about what we're going to do next. What do I need to do my laundry today? What's going on at work? All of the narratives and plots and plans we have, which aren't clearly rhythmic in their unfolding. But then there are certain activities we can engage with which are characterized by rhythms. Could could be singing, dancing, sex, could be eating, could be running, even walking, even a conversation has a certain rhythmicity to it that allows you to follow and produce in a certain way that makes communication possible. So these rhythms, if they're now pushing the swing of your internal oscillations, can potentially entrain them to be more synchronized with those. There's another phenomenon, which is when you attend to a rhythm, you'll see that the strength of the entrainment effect is more. And so if I'm I'm listening to the song, you'll see these evoked potentials inside my brain. They're going to be more entrained to the song if I attend to it as opposed to not. Mechanistically, you can think of the pushing on the swing model, making sure the timing's right, making things are coordinated such that the pushes and the pulls can happen at the right time. But the important thing here is when you attend to something, the entrainment is stronger. But when entrainment affects, but it's also easier to attend to something when it is in phase with your internal endogenous, your ongoing rhythms, then it's easier to detect it, to attend to it, and be more entrained by it. Specifically, so it seems like the default refresh rate of consciousness is roughly at alpha frequencies in terms of this passive sampling from the environment. So that's about 8 to 12 times a second. And so if I'm to flash a face and maybe have you make some discrimination, is this a female or a male face, or a dog versus a cat? You're going to be and I briefly flash it, you're going to be much more likely to detect it if I do this in line with your ongoing oscillations. So I'm suggesting that there is a positive feedback loop between becoming entrained and attending to a rhythm, such that engaging with a rhythm is a very special situation, and that you get this positive feedback loop of focused attention. You might call this absorption and potentially flow. And that what these engaging with these rhythms can do is they can basically fill your awareness, fill your consciousness, and crowd out other arrhythmic things, so allowing you to experiencing them more deeply. And if you further reduce the competition for anything else because it feels good, and you could go even more deeply. The deeper you go, the better it feels, the deeper you go. Or alternatively, in the case of dysfunction, the inability to experience pleasure, you might fail to get this because something is anxiety-provoking or distracting that prevents you from falling into this attracting state. And so now the idea with trance, with orgasm, would be that if you allow this to continue, this trance state, this absorbing state, this, as it goes on, would allow more and more neural systems to enter into synchrony with each other, to be able to align their activity, and that this could allow certain systems, largely the brainstem, these old systems that would actually control whether or not you release your sperm and eggs, or that would trigger the spasms that would correspond to having a climax or an orgasm. And that these systems, though, are thresholded. You don't want them just going off all the time. That would either be a dead fish, or it's just a wasted opportunity. If you just dropped your eggs in the middle of the ocean for no good reason, or you're a cricket and you just dropped your sperm packet in some back alley somewhere, that's not a good strategy for making it into the future. So the idea is you want these to be timed and occasioned by you being in proximity to someone with enough evolutionary fitness and a good enough organism that you want to commingle your genes for the next generation. You want to put that investment in there. And so the idea is that the brainstem, which would basically be this itself a set of pattern generators on top of the spine, which is a set of pattern generators which allow you to move coherently. One more thing with this pattern generation and rhythms. In a way, before we even talk about neurons, the origins of it might even just be in terms of the mechanics of moving and swimming. You need to create these stable rhythmic modes. Whether we're talking about a fish, it's fairly obvious. A fish that's flopping all over the place doesn't swim. It's the precise undulation of the rhythm that lets the fish swim. You'll see this in worms and different, it's ubiquitous. And so neural syntax has to be rhythmic in order to work at all, but it also has to be rhythmic in order to work with morphology, which is rhythmic. So the spine is rhythmic, and now this brainstem controller on top of it is another set of rhythms on top of rhythmic pattern generators on top of that, that if you can hit them hard enough with enough converging inputs, if you can get enough convergent, coherent activity, potentially from a highly entrained system where you have this communication through coherence and the signals can all sum rather than decay, but converge with synergy, that you can push past these thresholds and trigger climax and orgasm. You all with me still? Hello?
Yes, we are all there.
Okay, good.
Super interesting.
Excellent. That's so good to hear. Yeah. So some of this, it turns out, was converged upon by Barry Komisarek. He has a paper in 2011, I believe, with Whipple, or it might have been 2013. I think it's 2013 with Whipple, where he suggests that there is a parallel between orgasms and seizures. And so that was reassuring. And then when I discovered that, I was like, okay, this is not just a crazy notion. Let's go do this. And Barry is a really great guy, by the way. So I have this idea here of, I've come up with different ways of modeling it. There's different complexity ideas that might be relevant. I'm not going to go into the details of that right now, but one way of thinking about this is in terms of explosive percolation through networks. And so like here, it would be like, you could see like conditions under which you might get like a forest fire, like a wildfire to spread throughout a forest. If the forest is relatively sparse, it's early in the season, you're unlikely to get some sort of raging wildfire going through it. However, if you let the trees get really dense and overgrown, and then you dry them out just a little bit, or you don't even need to dry them out that much if it's dense enough, then you get this capacity for this explosive percolating spreading of, in this case, fire. But if we're talking about a brain, this could be neural activity. And so this would be a model, I would suggest, of orgasm as a quasi-epileptiform or quasi-seizure-like process, with some resemblances to reflex epilepsies because of the ways in which it is stimulated rhythmically, and some resemblances to absence seizures in terms of the way in which the self gets crowded out. And specifically of seizures, maybe some deep connection, I would expect, and I predict, to temporal lobe epilepsies, which we know to be associated with ecstatic states, often. At least it was for my father and Dostoevsky. So, but before we even get to climax or orgasm, and so then on top of this, so the idea is that the spreading activity itself is part of the this turbocharging of the brain, because you can get so much throughput once things are rhythmically aligned. You can once you get this resonant brain, you can ring the bell, and that this can be a highly and maybe the most intense of all experiences. But on top of that, going back to that brainstem, not only does it move the body and cause these spasms, but it's got its neural fingers on the brainstem's pharmacopoeia, so it can release, let loose the opioids, let loose the dopamine. The dopamine is a little bit complicated story, but all the internal your brain's drug dealer can let loose at the exact same time you have maximal absorption with a pleasure, and where you have turbocharged the brain to the max. Turbocharged, and actually more specifically, I would say in this case, consciousness. But before we even get there, it's, I would say that this ability to be absorbed parallels, these deep, profound experiences, peak experiences, the most meaningful and pleasurable experiences, which have been described more recently in terms of flow, or more traditionally in terms of trance. And that even before you reach climax and orgasm, you're already in a state of ecstasy, or being outside of the self. The self, there's different ways of thinking about it. You have like your minimal embodied self, just like your sense of a body. But then there's these other aspects of self, like your ego, like your extended self throughout the world. But me, what I have to do next, what you think of me, what I think of you, what you might think, what I might think, all that whole like glorious mess, sometimes glorious. But when you're absorbed, there's no room for that. You've crowded that out. And so, you might call this flow, being in the zone, but you might also call it trance. It's a kind of spiritual experience. It's an altered state of consciousness. And it's back to this depiction of Saint Teresa. So the thing, though, about selves, and was just intimating, is that to kind of take a page from Buddhism, selves can get into trouble. It can kind of be a drag to be a self sometimes, and that you can't control everything. And so all the things you care about can be menaced in all sorts of ways by all sorts of things you can't control. At least that's how it is for me. And so the idea, though, is if you can forget the aspects of yourself which are contingent in these ways, the aspects of yourself which can suffer in these ways because they can realize, all the ways in which they might be threatened, just letting go of this thing you have to monitor, and sometimes with some anxiety, or not anxiety, or frustration, whatever, but just letting go of this, that itself could be part of the pleasure. So not only would rhythms let you engage very deeply with something that's already pleasurable, letting it register and resonate with you more, but you might get the additional pleasure of basically forgetting your worries, forgetting all the things you have to think about. And that's probably also a profound part of it, which I would imagine would, vary actually a good amount between individuals. People are, they vary and how well disposed they are towards their egoic selves. So I haven't been able to get into this, but I've been meaning to for years, which is what I did in the first paper. Is I just wanted to lay down that this mechanism, could entrainment happen? Could this explain climax? And could the individual experience of absorption, does this even work? And I believe it does, and increasing evidence since then suggests it does from a variety of sources. But one thing is the interpersonal element. So if we are both engaging with the same rhythm and we're both entrained to this rhythm, then we're entrained to each other. Our brains, via this shared song, this shared dance, this shared sexual pleasure, this means that we have a communication channel which can bring our brains and minds into sync. So again, this positive feedback loop. But in this case, it's not just with the activity, but it's with the person you're with. They are the stimulus. And so let's say we're talking about, you're looking at your partner or feeling your partner. Well, if you're in the same rhythm, I mentioned before, the entrainment effect, your attention is greater if something's aligned with your ongoing oscillations. And so let's say you are both, at least theta, I would say, probably that's 3 to 7 times a second, maybe as much as alpha though, 8 to 12 times a second, that you're synced in time, where you are attending to the environment and move and at exactly the same time. And so you can see, if it's, you can see the body posture, you can see the person's face, their facial expressions, you have this high bandwidth channel coming through. And so you're seeing them and potentially having emotional contagion with this shared experience. Their pleasure can register in you, can become part of your pleasure, your excitement. And this is all happening in a case where you've potentially crowded out some of the self boundaries that would be less porous, less inclusive of the other. And in this case, so you're having deep pleasure, your defenses, the self as a defense structure, the gates are down, and you are communicating intensely, seeing everything that your partner is experiencing and them to you in this tight loop. This seems like a really good mechanism for bonding. For whether we're talking about people having sex with each other, or people historically dancing with each other and singing together, or maybe the origins of it was between mother and child, or goes far back as mammals in terms of the bonding elements. And so that's the idea, is that you have this similar kind of potential, and so just that would cause bonding. But now on top of that, let's put you into a state where you have a climax and an orgasm. And so now I've flooded your brain with these neuromodulators, these things that will elevate your plasticity. And so now whatever this thing that just happened, not only will you have peak pleasure with the other person, but you will also have maximal reinforcement of those patterns. Maximal synaptogenesis will now accompany that experience, and you're going to remember that. That's going to be a strong attractor and a strong attractor to the other, and a source of bonding. And it's possible that, so this part here is very speculative, but I think it might be the case that on the bottom right here, I have this picture of this, I think it's a woman, experiencing the rubber hand illusion, where basically if I'm going to take, so this is interesting perceptual illusion where if I take your hand and I hide it under a table, and then I put a rubber hand on top of it, and now I stroke in synchrony your hidden hand and the rubber hand, after a certain period of time from that synchrony, you will get the experience that your that hand is your hand. And so like here, there's a knife there, and that they've done experiments where like, if I act like I'm going to stab the hand, your nervous system freaks out. You actually will feel pain. And you can do this not just with like a limb. With VR, you can do this with the whole body. And I've experienced this, at least for me, this was not ambiguous. It's like a compelling effect. You don't have to suspend your disbelief. It's intense. And so, but the idea here is I'm wondering whether by sharing rhythms through entrainment, that this is actually part of the mechanism by which we figure out the embodied self, our body ownership, the boundaries of who we are physically. So there's interesting phenomena where, for instance, if you look at someone using a tool, the tool actually gets incorporated into their body maps. The hammer becomes part of the hand and arm representation of the craftsperson. The master swordswoman, the sword is part of the body. And so if we're sharing rhythms, do we actually get a sense of co-embodiment with each other? An additional sense of merging of self and other, and is this a part of bonding? And is this potentially part of uniquely human bonding? Humans, we seem to be unique at a very basic level, like a biophysical basic level, with respect to two things. We're really good at long distance running. It's just part of being upright, and we have a couple other adaptations, also rhythmic. And we're really good at rhythms. We're actually, like in terms of the ability to do both precise and flexible rhythms, we might be like the virtuosos of the animal kingdom. And interestingly, if you look at like the genes that were selected in the origins of humans as opposed to Neanderthals, a lot of them are in the cerebellum, which is largely a timing structure. It's not just that, but that's a large part of it, is just making sure that the timing is coordinated, that you actually are getting coherent brain activity by adjusting the timing of these different loops. And so it's possible that a lot of humanness, our ability to basically bond with each other, to be cooperative, the things that got intense social learning and cumulative culture off the ground, the reason we like rule the planet now for a time, it might have actually been deeply related to rhythms, a uniquely cooperative, other social nature, potentially scaffolded partially by rhythmic virtuosity. Very speculative, but it could be the case. And so I guess let's see, is this one going to work? Yeah. And so in terms of bonding, this video is one of my favorite things in the world, and I'm going to show it to you. It's a Mori Haka. What are they doing there? And it's at a wedding. So these are done to prepare for battle. In the modern day, they're done to prepare for sports matches, and they're done to occasion life transitions. And the thing about life transitions is it's an adjustment of like who you think you are. You're now about something different, and maybe other people are incorporated into this. In this case, a wedding. And that's an ecstatic state if I've ever seen one. To this day, I still think that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And thank you for your time and attention. So how do I undo the sharing? There we go.
Ooh. Well, thank you so much, Adam, for that talk. I'm going to open it up to the group for questions. I see Marie already has one and is first one on the draw. So over to you, Marie.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for all the insights and explanations. It was super interesting and exciting. And I was actually wondering, I think it was like the third last chart, if you can say so. So when people to get it sync, would they sync faster if we actually would put them on Coke cans like the metronomes? Would that help? I mean, maybe not Coke cans, but something which would transfer like vibrations?
I think the more channels, the better. And I think a lot of what you see in terms of like optimal entrainment protocols are already reflected in what we naturally do. So like when you're like, when we're for any of the activities, like if we're having sex or if we're dancing, like the music is there, the motion is there. You're looking at each other, and you're like, even like frame and like social dancing, it's like you're creating like an optimal connection between the person that's not too tight and not too loose, that lets you do both stable and flexible adjustment to each other. And in terms of sex, like that could be part of the reason, for instance, we vocalize, is we're adding another channel to the mix. And so in theory, like you could add additional tactile channels. You could add, well, there might be some upper limit, but I think so.
Okay, so adding a device to both of the bodies which would transmit vibrations, or like something from one body to the other, would basically, or could help enhance the experience.
I believe so. If I were a person, I would bet on it.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm a betting person.
Not me, but it's good that you're going for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So while I let a few other people noodle on some questions, I had one which is right. So in the metronome example, you have multiple bodies all simultaneously coming together. But in the human example of sexuality, I think there's right. Is there sort of an equal, or is there like a master clock, slave clock? And if there is a master slave relationship, can you turn that master into a third object? So is there a hypothetical sex toy that both the male and female, or male and male, or female and female partner could entrain to? Right. So is it possible to have an artificial being be that driver?
Mm-hmm. 1 second, there we go. My computer almost died. You know when you think it's plugged in, but it wasn't? Anyway, so I believe so, and I believe there's an extent, again, to which like what we naturally do, like the practices we've discovered in like deep time, already point to that to some degree, but you could do more. So like, a failure mode can happen of synchrony where people are second guessing each other, and like in the attempt to get in sync, end up getting out of sync. And so like having like a clear direction, a slight lead and follow, which we do in dance, that can potentially help. But another way of doing it, rather than having a clear lead and follow, is you can have an extra personal lead that you both go to. And you see it somewhat with music, maybe, well, probably already You're getting some of this with the Morihaka case, in that there's people who have different like statuses, different amount of like prestige within the group in a prestige hierarchy, maybe a dominance hierarchy, but I'd say like in that case more prestige. And in this case, that person is helping to lead the rhythms more. There's more attention on them. With an orchestra, that's part of what the conductor is doing also. And that's a limit. Like you can do conductorless orchestras, but they tend to train a lot slower, and they're limited in how big they can be. So I'd say yes, and I'd say that could potentially also cut through not just this sort of like second guess dithering thing that could be possible. I've never experienced this ever in my life, but it could also let you let go of other sorts of things that could happen, where it's like just like who's leading, who's following, like I don't want to, let's call it drama for the moment. It could just cut through drama potentially if you had something like that. Not that I've ever experienced anything like that. Ever.
Thanks, Adam. I see Johannes popping up. Did you have a question?
Yeah, kind of. So I'm an avid raver, and before a techno raver, and that there's
I
much
knew
about.
you would ask that, Johannes.
Yeah. No, it's really something that made me wonder when I saw your awesome talk. Thank you so much for that. Because before Corona came, there was this magic on Berlin dance floors where really a huge ton of people would move in synchrony, like even those metronomies you showed us. And this magic is gone after 1.5 years. And it really it made me wonder, like, what happened? What is your take on this?
So it seems that because it feels good to be in like communion with others, because it feels every aspect of this, in theory could feel not just good, but the best feelings and the most meaningful feelings we have. That's a very strong reinforcement signal. And so a lot of it is like can be explained just in terms of like the energetics of like attractor formation and like Hamilton's principle of least action and just like metronome. Like, but a lot of it for us, we're helping the process along because we're learning how to be better resonators and better partners for this sort of thing. And so you can fall out of practice, but I think there's another element where it's like in terms of things that could compete. So it can go in either direction. This could be a model of peak sexual functioning or sexual dysfunction. And so if you don't have trust, like this feeling of really wanting to, like you feel okay letting yourself go with someone else, that could create competing patterns in your mind and your consciousness that are now keeping you from being as good of a resonant instrument with others, as good of your own adjustments. You're now multitasking, and you're going to be less good at what you're doing. And to kind of loop back around a little bit to what Marie was mentioning, like I think we're paying a terrible price with Zoom and masks. And I mean, we got to stop the spread, but like I think it's going to be difficult to underestimate what we're doing here. The more we need the bandwidth, because this bandwidth gives another kind of honest signal for trust. When things are fast enough, you're getting the micro expressions. It's hard to fake that. But when someone's masked, when I put some lag here, well, who knows what it is? And so, yeah, I think in time that'll be gotten. That I imagine people will find it again because that's our birthright. But I don't know how long it takes.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for giving me the words for what it was I was always trying to describe, because like 95% of the people nearest to me in my life I found on the dance floors, and I always described, especially for me, it's techno, yeah, techno as the perfect human filter where with the people I'm most in synchrony while dancing, they fit perfectly in my life. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I had a bit of a follow-on to Johannes's question, right? Techno, due to the highly rhythmic nature and the strong driving beat, is a really effective entrainment device. But within, I'm not suggesting we play techno in the bedroom to improve people's sex lives. Are there other human behavioral aspects we can use as an entrainment mechanism? Is breathing an interesting, I mean, there's a large relationship in tantric sex between breath and climax, but are there sort of like breath work ideas, or is it really just about, coupling a rhythm to maybe thrusting or physical movement to bring in? And sorry, Maria, I think I stepped on your question, so you're up next.
I would say very much yes. And like in terms of things that people naturally do, definitely breathing, partially also because like it's actually difficult to overstate the importance of both breath and cardiac signals and gross motion in general for entraining the brain. Like it's the body maps themselves. It's the most coherent source of synchrony you have because you indeed have a body where all the signals are going to be tightly correlated because you have a physical body that has just things go together. And so you're getting this intense source of synchrony there. But breath, there seems to be like, even like the syntax of consciousness, it's like the inhalation seems to be like an evidence accumulation phase, and then you're more likely to do actions on the exhalation. So it's like you're like figuring out so like the hippocampal rhythm at the core of things, and also related to temporal lobe epilepsy, that's very heavily entrained by the breath. And so you're basically taking the conductor, this core orchestrator of the entire system, and you have you're not just putting in the correlated energy, but it's right at the heart of things. And the heart itself also, cardiac evoked potentials, those are strong. One more thing would be, we're kind of looping back to the rubber hand illusion. You actually find that illusion takes a lot more quickly if you overlay the cardiac sensation on top of it. So if you can get people to be cardiac aligned, and if you can get people potentially to, got some ideas, but you can potentially get people to get their more in tune with their cardiac sensation, this could also allow them to have more, not just both co-presence and presence with their own body, greater experience. And then one more thing I would say would be, we sometimes nest rhythms. And so there'll be like a faster rhythm that's carried within like a slower rhythm. And so to align these with to hit the right systems with nested rhythms by whatever medium you're using, through a vibrotactile device, that could be particularly powerful. You maybe get both the theta hitting that hippocampal system and the frontal action attention, and also the alpha, this passive refreshing of the conscious. You can hit them both. Yeah. Hi, Marie.
Hi, Adam. Really nice to hear your talk. Super interesting. And my next question, I'm not even sure if it has space here, but I was thinking, because you were talking about this resonating of energy, and in this case, and also you were talking about epilepsy. So does it also, I mean, it really depends on the context, right? But I was wondering, for example, now we recently had this huge stampede at the Travis Scott concert, where the panic broke out, and or we had it like 11 years ago, also with the Love Parade, like this big techno parade here in Berlin. Would you say it's kind of a similar way of resonating and makes people, that on the one hand you could go into a positive ecstatic flow, but it could also be a panic thing? Is it the same kind of thing, but we just assess it differently, the one positive, the other negative, or is it a completely different thing we're actually talking about? But I'm just really impressed by happenings like the Love Parade, that there's this one thing and then it turns to hours and hours of panic, and you just cannot stop it anymore because it's going on, you know, like the metronome in a way.
There's so much there. I really, really love this. Like, okay, so one thing that's coming to mind is actually like that is almost like a really good analogy, like a distinction to be made between climax, orgasm, and seizure. They are different in that there's a kind of self-limiting nature. Like in one case, it's pathological; in one case, it isn't. And so, and you could think of that stampede almost like a kind of like, you know, seizure, like a collective seizure in a way. I know that people will, for various reasons, sometimes will have dysphoria accompanying climax, so that could be potentially related, or it could just be like a priming of whatever like attachment schemas you have. Like it could be, but related to that. But also you could see like along the way, you're trying to head towards a state of deepening absorption, but just as the energy goes up, your interpretation of the body signals, could, instead of it being excitement, it could get funneled into a different construal, a different attracting state. And so it's possible for some people actually like increasing the gain on these processes, like you might need some sort of like cognitive and behavioral like intervention to actually like help them navigate that more skillfully, or not skillfully, but like avoid some of the places they don't want to go. And then the one more thought would be just to also to differentiate from epilepsy, there is some risk, I'd say, with any entrainment device for like people who are vulnerable to epilepsy. Potentially, fortunately, the thing that seems hardest to, and that's not across the board the case, and it seems like high alpha is where you have like peak risk. So like it might be like in the 13 to 14 hertz range. You might not want to touch that. But otherwise, you might be okay. And I think you would be. Like I haven't seen evidence of like reflex seizures being strongly associated with like the slower rhythms or low alpha. But high alpha, there's some, you know, so there's risks to keep in mind on multiple levels. There's, yeah, I don't know if that got it. That's what came up from what you said. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Yeah. I mean, it was a big topic, but actually nice that you brought it also back to the, well, for us probably really toys and so on. So yeah.
So I do have actually one last question, which is sort of the inverse of Marie. She was just asking, are there any like frequencies or behaviors not to entrain? But are there any frequencies and behaviors you might be able to suggest as being more optimal, particularly for climax?
I would say to get nested theta alpha coupling. And so I would want a harmonic nesting. You might have to do some sort of adaptive phase lock loop to get it to work, but of the 3 to 7 hertz carrier wave with the 8 to 12 hertz alpha rhythm. There's some evidence from advanced meditators suggesting that this is part of what they achieve. I think that's a good guide. I would also though want to bring into the mix the even slower interoceptive rhythms, and some sort of flexibly adaptable, maybe 3-tier harmonic nesting of rhythms of body, intention, and attention. That could be potentially good for getting you to the place where you can cross thresholds. There's an interesting thing though, like the phenomenon of edging. So it's like, and also with explosive percolation theory, where you would want, like if you get there too quick, you've got a highly connected network that you can ring the bell, but it's kind of like, eh. But if you like let it like, you know, hold off the sync, like you let the attractors grow, you pull off, you let them, and you get, and by doing this, you can get a bunch of small synchronous elements, a really overgrown forest, bam. And so that could be something to consider also. And I have a couple additional ideas that wouldn't be exactly the frequency of stimulation, but I think if you can get basically heart connection there, I think that could be powerful. Basically, I think science has devalued everything that's most important and actually powerfully explanatory about us. And so it's just like the things that you might be embarrassed to talk about. You shouldn't be embarrassed. They're basically like there is a wisdom to what people do and people's impressions of things. We use words in the way we use them for some reasons. We are attracted to things. We have our reasons. We're all doing a kind of citizen science experiment all the time. All right.
Very cool. Well, we are right on time. I want to be the first to thank you so much, Adam, for coming in and giving us a talk today. Definitely highly interesting. From my end, I know I've had conversations with you many a times where I learn something new every time, and I'm hearing the applause from the group. But let me just be the first to sort of thank you from us.
Thank you.
Thanks again to everyone for joining this latest edition of the External Speaker Series at WowTech. The recordings will be posted once again to the team's channel. Thank you again to Adam for taking the time to come talk to us and answer so many questions. Thank you again to everyone from all the different teams who have decided to come today to actually attend. Please encourage your peers, your colleagues to suggest additional topics, additional speakers, and to join the team to actually see the recordings and to use these as reference material in the future. So with that, thank you again, everyone, and I wish you the best of the rest of your day. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.